Why is Georgia drifting towards authoritarianism? Why is its current government aligning more closely with Russia and even blaming its predecessors for Russia's 2008 invasion of Georgia? How are the histories of Ukraine and Georgia deeply intertwined, and why are these two countries key to understanding Eastern Europe? You are listening to the Explaining Ukraine podcast. My name is Volodymyr Yermolenko. I am a Ukrainian philosopher, the chief editor of UkraineWorld and the president of PEN Ukraine. My guest today is Tornike Gordadze, former Georgian State Minister for Euro-Atlantic integration. He currently teaches at Sciences Po and the Jacques Delors Institute in Paris. We recorded this conversation in Tbilisi during the vibrant Zeg Festival, where both Tornike and I were participants. The Explaining Ukraine podcast is produced by UkraineWorld, an English-language media outlet about Ukraine, run by Internews Ukraine. You can support our work on Patreon. Your support is crucial as we rely heavily on crowdfunding. You can also help fund our volunteer trips to frontline areas in Ukraine, where we support both soldiers and civilians. Donations are welcome via PayPal. All links are in the episode description. So let's begin. Tornike Gordadze, welcome to this podcast.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
So we are in Tbilisi, and I am a Ukrainian philosopher, and you are a Georgian former politician, now political scientist. How can you explain to our audience the connection between Georgia and Ukraine in the current moment, of course, with reference to Russia and to Russian imperialism? What are we living through in the current moment, going back historically as well?
I will not go very far in the past, because there are lots of examples that can be mobilized to prove how strong these relations are. But currently, there is something very strong between our two societies. You see in Tbilisi, I travel a lot in Europe, and I've never seen such a intense and dense mobilization of Ukrainian flags and graffitis in favor of Ukraine elsewhere. It's in the center of Tbilisi. People are extremely supportive of Ukraine's fight for freedom. People understand that Ukrainians are not fighting only for themselves. This is also why so many Georgians went to Ukraine and are today still fighting in the different units of the Ukrainian army, and several dozens of them, 60 or something, already died after 2022. There were also a few others who sacrificed their lives in 2014 or in between these two invasions. Besides that, every Georgian, or at least a huge majority of Georgians, understand that Ukrainian victory will represent a chance for Georgia to change situation locally, because it's not a secret that Georgian authorities are not supporting Ukraine. On the contrary, at the beginning, and we see this evolution because it started even before the 2022. I remember the first worrisome sign of this was the interview that Georgia's Prime Minister, then Irakli gave an interview to BBC. It was 2015, and he was asked about the parallel between Ukraine's fight for territorial integrity and independence and Georgia's one. And he said, no, these are two different things. We are now trying to find a solution through peaceful means with Russia. And it was the first time that a Georgian politician representing the state desolidarized the whole country or the government from Ukraine. It was quite shocking. Then several months later, there were no open attacks against Ukraine, verbal attacks, I mean. But after the invasion 2022, it became really obvious. at the beginning it was quite discreet. It was quite more or less neutral statements about, we want peace. Look at what happens in Ukraine. It's terrible. It's very bad. We don't want this. And then slowly it became unmasked sympathies for Russia, which is one of the things they also try to avoid saying it publicly quite often, because they know that the Georgian majority, even those who vote for Georgian Dream, are not very eager to understand this pro-Russian bias. Some of them explain, we need to protect our country because Russia will punish us. We should be more clever. But it's quite uncomfortable, even for those who support Georgian Dream, to not to support Ukraine and to be on the Russia side.
But let me come back to this recent past, and just 2008. And I remember very well the August 2008, and how my friend called me and said, "Have you seen the news? The Russia attacked Georgia." And I think in my milieu, everybody understood that it's a very hard time for Georgia, but also that Ukraine will be next. How you will connect these two invasions, 2008 Georgia and 2014, and then 22 Ukraine?
There are obvious parallels, of course. First, like in Ukraine, Russia tested and tried to obtain the control of the country through economic means. We had embargo. We had even lots of Georgians who were deported from Russia, Georgians working in Russia, etc. When tried to divide your Georgian society and instrumentalizing some political forces. These attempts were not very successful or very partially successful. So then it continued with the open support and instrumentalization of some separatist pro-Russian movements in Abkhazia and South Ossetia in Georgia, in Donbas and Crimea in Ukraine. And even the methodology was so similar. People sent from Russia trying to organize locally rebellion against the central authorities. Most of them later on appeared that they were KGB or GRU agents and not just volunteers from different patriotic forces from Russia. And Georgia was the first example. At this time, Russia was maybe not strong enough to start with Ukraine because it's much bigger than Georgia. And there was, for the Russians, there was a threat for them in their understanding that in 2008, that was the year of a NATO summit in Bucharest. Unfortunately, the decision that the Europeans made at this moment not to give the membership action plan to Ukraine and Georgia for the sake of peace, that's how they explained this refusal, saying that it will calm down Russia, it will de-escalate our mounting problems with Russia, but exactly the opposite happened. So Georgia and Ukraine were the two countries who were attacked, and not the Baltic states who were NATO members. And because of this refusal, Russia felt encouraged, or at least permitted to attack Georgia and Ukraine. So Georgia was for the first to suffer. Then not enough lessons were taken from this invasion. From the European side, and maybe probably also in Ukraine. You know better if the Ukrainian political forces took enough lessons from what happened in Georgia in 2008, because you had Yanukovych won elections 2 years later in Ukraine. It was unfortunately lots of mistakes everywhere. I mean, Europeans, Americans, Ukrainians, Georgians, they didn't see, even if people who were vigilant enough, they saw that something similar would happen, and Ukraine was ideally the next possible target with stronger Russia. And now, Russians decided if they destroy Ukraine, if they occupy, or if they enlarge their zone of influence on Ukraine, automatically the rest of the post-Soviet space will surrender without any gunshot, and then they can continue further.
Let me come back to this Bucharest summit of NATO. So it's 2008, if I'm not mistaken, April. It's spring. Yeah. So Russia attacked Georgia in August. And my argument always is that, look, it's because in April there was no clear path to NATO membership, because we were denied the membership action plan, that Russia understood that it's possible. It's possible to attack, like a preventive strike, so that to stop this movement. While the NATO skeptics and NATO critics, I recently heard the Jeffrey Sachs, he's famously saying that it's all because of NATO, you know, all the wars are because of NATO. So his argument is that, well, it's precisely because there was this promise, and we remember that there was this promise that Ukraine and Georgia will become NATO member states, that Russia attacked to prevent it. So what is your argument?
Of course, I strongly disagree with Jeffrey Sachs or any other Russian politician, including Putin, who explained the whole, Russia's imperialism as a byproduct or by effect of NATO enlargement. Of course, Russians, it's due to the internal evolution of Russian political system and Russian dominant ideology that Russia started to reoccupy, to extend its influence and its territory. These explanations of NATO enlargement and this April 2008 decision, this decision was bad because it was ambiguous. It gave Russia chance to attack, to interpret as they wished. They understood it as weakness of the West and not as West coming to the Russia's border. On the contrary, they understood that they analyzed this as the West was weak enough. They were afraid of Russia, so why should we stop? There we are, so we should move forward. Same thing in 2013, if you remember, Syria. So President Obama decided not to intervene when the Syrian regime crossed the red lines he drew himself to the regime. He said that if there's a use of chemical weapons and the weapons of mass destruction, United States of America will intervene militarily in Syria. I was in France at this moment. I remember very well that there was already a coalition between the French, the Brits, and the United States. Suddenly, UK decided not to intervene because they failed. The parliament voted against, and any military intervention in the UK depends on parliament, which is not the case in France. The president decides, and then parliament votes after presidential decision. But even with UK out, France and US were ready to intervene. And suddenly the French discovered at the very last moment, the planes were already loaded with bombs. I was told by the French military that the US was not going to intervene because they preferred to believe a Russian promise that they will allow international the commission to study what really happened. And that gave the Obama's refusal to intervene and to accept this Russian narrative gave Russia this idea and convinced Russia that they could do anything they wanted. And a few months later, they attacked Ukraine. I'm pretty sure that this weakness again of the West gave them, this opinion that they could go farther. When they saw how the United States left Afghanistan in 2020, summer 2021, it's also a sign of weakness. And that probably was another argument, maybe not the main argument, but another argument to think that in a few months later it was possible to go and to attack Ukraine again.
When I look at this line of Russia invasions, I see that at the every new sport there is a scaling. So the scale is larger. So the war against Georgia was quite short. And Georgia is, of course, smaller than, for example, Ukraine or even Syria. Then there was Syria. Then there were also very, targeted operation against Ukraine. Annexation of Crimea and, entering the eastern part of Ukraine with a few cities, with some paramilitary groups, not the real army, and then engaging of the army, etc. And then 2022, full-scale invasion against a very big country. Why I'm saying that? Because people who are saying, no, Russia will not attack NATO member states, I think they need to be aware that, because of this lack of response from NATO, from the West, the appetite is growing. Will you agree on that?
Yes, of course, because they didn't pay any price for previous interventions. In Georgia, 2008, I remember there was 0 sanctions against Russia. On the contrary, they were rewarded with the reset policy a few months later in 2009. Remember, Obama plus Secretary Hillary Clinton, they pushed the reset button together with Lavrov. So yes, they didn't pay any price. The situation was normalized quite quickly, even up to 2014. 2014, there were some sanctions already, economic sanctions, but they were so weak that it slowed down a little bit Russian economy for 1 or 2 years. Some of the reserves, gold and the currency reserves of Russia diminished, but it was not enough. Russia, rationally speaking, they understood that it was a quite small price they have paid for 2014, and of course it's encouraged them to go farther. And now, we see much bigger mobilization from the Western side. The fact that there's huge and massive aid to Ukraine, military aid, financial, economic aid. So this we lost 10, 15 years and thousands of lives and economic destructions. All this could have been avoided if the reaction was adequate from the West. And now I don't know if Russia is ready. It will depend how this war, at least the hot phase of this war, will finish in Ukraine. If the Russians have the impression, if they make the calculus and they say we are winners, at the end of the day, we lost maybe several hundreds of thousands of our people, and this amount of ammunition, but it was worth, because we won these big territories of Ukraine. We enlarged and we saw also we showed that the West was not strong. So why they would not go further, especially when we see that their economy, for internal reasons, political reasons, even for economic reasons now, they need this war economy which works in Russia. They have a economic growth which is not healthy, of course. It's only due to the military commands, but Russian economy is not dead, and this type of economy gives Russia the impression that they need it. They need this type of this situation for the regime to continue.
Let me come back to Georgia. So what happened with Georgia? We remember the Rose Revolution, 2003, and the big reforms by Mikhail Saakashvili. And then Ukraine was looking at Georgia as an example. And if you look at the Ukrainian liberal discourse in 2000s, so the discourse was Georgia is a success, Ukraine is a failure after the Orange Revolution, because the Orange Revolution of 2004 didn't produce 2004 and 2005 didn't produce that much of radical reforms that Saakashvili government has made. What happened afterwards, and where are we now? Because we are now in the rule of Georgian Dream for over 10 years. How many?
12.
12 years?
Yeah, 30, almost 13. In October it will be 13.
And we are amid the rallies against this regime for already more than 200 days. And I've been to the square yesterday, and we have arrests of many activists, over several hundreds of political prisoners, and we have a regime that is, shows its sympathies to Russia and rewrites the history of 2008, saying that it was Georgia's fault.
Not only the history of 2008, also the history of 2003 and the Rose Revolution. Now, the official version of the Georgian Dream is that 2003 Rose Revolution was the revolution of the foreign agents. So those who made this revolution were already acting under American and Western dictate. So what happened in Georgia? I agree. Georgia was considered as a success story, not only in Ukraine, but also by the Russian opposition at that moment. There were some books published by the Russian opposition members. The title was "У Грузии получилось." Почему у Грузии получилось? Something like this. Why for Georgia succeeded, and they considered this as a possible playbook for Russia. And after UNM's defeat, many of my colleagues went to Ukraine to work in different Ukrainian state agencies to help reforms. But from the very beginning, for Russia, it was a Georgian case was something. Russia tried from the very beginning to make Georgia's success as an anomaly. For them, it was very important to show that Georgia failed. It was not the war. 2008 war was not about territories, about Abkhazia and South Ossetia. They really wanted, as in the case of Ukraine, they wanted to crush an alternative vision, an alternative path that this small country, which was as corrupt as Russia before, a failed state in the 90s, we had civil war, the huge corruption, and in a few years, this state became almost entirely free from corruption. State institutions worked perfectly. Of course, everything was not perfect, and we can come back to that, but it was a very dangerous precedent, an example for Russia, and it was the objective of Russia was to show that it cannot really work in this part of the world. So the Georgian discourse that liberal democracy plus viable state are compatible in this part of the world was against the Putin's theory that democracy, liberal democracy is something that was invented in Western Europe or in North America, and this is something culturally and geographically circumscribed in this part of the world. Here, we cannot have this. The maximum we can have is a sovereign democracy, a vertical of power, and corruption, but organized corruption, not anarchy like in the 90s, but corruption that is kind of pyramid of corruption. And this suddenly a small country like Georgia with no resources, it's relatively poor country, even in Eastern European standards, was performing extremely well. So it was something that they really needed to destroy, and they used lots of means. I already mentioned these economic embargoes, introduction of visas for Georgian citizens, and expulsion of thousands of Georgians from Russia. And then at the end, they tried an invasion. But after this invasion was a half success. They, of course, occupied Abkhazia and South Ossetia, but they failed to the regime change. So after 2008, this is at this moment, which is interesting, is that there was no such a concept as hybrid warfare in 2008, or this concept appeared especially in Western, the analysis much later. But Russia experienced also extreme measures of hybrid warfare in Georgia after 2008. And the pro-Russian propaganda, the rumors, fake news about Saakashvili being a dictator. I'm saying every propaganda needs a part of the truth, I don't know, 10%, 20%. but then amplifying it and using it constantly played some role. And there was a huge attempt to change our memories. Again, this story that Georgia provoked the war in 2008, and if Georgia lost Abkhazia and South Ossetia, it was Georgia's and Saakashvili's personal mistake and his fault. If Georgia was nicer with Russia, more constructive, we would have some kind of federation with Abkhazia and South Ossetia together with Georgia, and Georgian refugees, like 10% of the population are internally displaced persons, could have been already in their houses, etc. So all these narratives were used sometimes by people who were not were not pro-Russian and anti-Western. But they were so much against Saakashvili. I can quote the names of these people who now are against Georgian Dream, and they regret that in 2012 they supported Georgian Dream. Now, like most of people who were not core members of Ivanishvili, a clan, and who supported Ivanishvili in 2012, now they regret and they are in the opposition. So it was a massive attempt to change minds of people through their propaganda and different measures they used, and it helped in 2012 Georgian Dream to win elections democratically. They won these elections democratically, and the fact that Saakashvili recognized the defeat and the UNM abandoned the power showed that it was not a dictatorship. Otherwise, Georgian Dream also lost elections in 2024, but they falsified the elections. So a dictatorship never abandons, the power through elections. And this manipulation played really a very important role in Georgian memory. And many people still, until now, have doubts how they say, okay, Saakashvili was very bad, but Ivanishvili is worse. So it's not like rehabilitation of the past regime, and that also shows this disarray and how the Georgian opposition cannot unite, because part of the Georgian opposition has a different memories of 2003, 2012, whilst the other part says, no, that was also bad.
And things are getting worse because we have this law about the foreign agents, which is copied from the Russian law on foreign agents, and there are lots of political arrests. And you said that the regime rigged the election. And can we say that it is really going closer and closer to Russia, and maybe closer to the Belarusian model? Or you can say that, well, there are still chances of regime change, and there are probably other influences from other countries, and including from the European countries. And what is the role of the Ukrainian struggle, of Ukrainian fight?
Yes, I'm not among those who still believe that, maybe it's a temporary, or they just waiting the end of war in Ukraine, and that's why they choose this option. No, this is the narrative that Georgian Dream spreads towards those who are not very hostile to them, but still are asking lots of questions why Georgian government took this direction. No, unfortunately this is as you mentioned Russian or Belarusian playbook that they apply. All these measures, and it's going very fast, because the foreign agent law was only last year. After that, a series of laws and amendments were adopted that drastically diminish the space for free speech, for freedom of media, draconian laws to repress any kind of public manifestation against the government. People are fined with the fines, if they just stand in the street, are fined with all of the cameras, like Chinese style, street cameras everywhere, and face recognition.
And I've seen people on the square yesterday. Many of them wear masks, not
because
to be recognized.
You automatically, in a few days, if you're identified by the camera, you receive a fine at your house of 50,000 laris. 50,000 laris, it's like 20 times the minimum salary of Georgian, or average salary of a Georgian citizen, which is crazy. I mean, and if you don't pay, then much stronger measures are employed against you, and you can be arrested, etc. And we also saw this activists, but also political leaders arrested. Not only activists, but they started with political leaders. All these limitations of freedom of media. I said one of the opposition TV channels already closed. 2 others are struggling to survive. So this is the Belarusian model copied and I would say implemented. At the same time, Georgian state, as they stopped their relations with the EU, they suspended all the EU integration process by themselves. It's not the EU, but after these rigged elections, they could have tried, after these rigged elections, to normalize a little bit the relations with the West. By the way, some of the analysts from West, they thought that, okay, now that they guaranteed that they have a majority in the parliament and they need recognition from the West, they will change their rhetorics and there will be maybe a U-turn. No, they did exactly the contrary. That's why I don't believe that they are acting only following their agenda. They feel pressure coming from Russia, and they are doing everything to destroy all the possible bridges with the West. When you adopt this kind of laws and amendments, it means that you are destroying, sabotaging consciously your European integration. And this is the only beneficiary from this is Russia. There's no other option. Of course, there are also Chinese money coming here, Middle Eastern money from the Gulf states, etc. Azerbaijan becoming quite influential in Georgia. The biggest taxpayer company in Georgia is Sokar, Azerbaijani company. And we see that Azerbaijan is extremely influential in Georgia, even more influential than Turkey, which is a much bigger and strong neighbor of Georgia.
And talking about the EU, you told me that there are some very weird connections with Hungary and with Viktor Orban, right? So let me maybe come to the last block and shift the topic a little bit, because you're living in Paris, you teach at Sciences Po. Let us talk a little bit of what is happening in Europe and in particular in France. So we see that America is kind of weirdly... Its politics, its policies with regard to Ukraine and Russia is changing all the time, and we don't know whether there is a policy. And of course, it was a wake-up call for Europe, and France is trying to play the leading role, also probably because President Macron has troubles in internal politics and doesn't have the full power. Maybe my hypothesis is that probably he tries to assert himself more on the international agenda. But how successful Europe is and how successful France is in leading Europe to help Ukraine in this war?
Do I have 2 minutes about Hungary?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I will start with this and then answer the question on France. Hungarian connection is very important for Georgia. After elections, these rigged elections of 26th of October, and we're in June, 7 official visits of Georgian de facto Prime Minister Kobachidze in Hungary. 7.
Who is teaching whom? Maybe Georgians are teaching Orban how to rig the...
They need each other, and I will tell you why. Hungary needs... But by the way, Hungary supports Georgia's membership in the EU in these conditions. I mean, because Hungarian policy is not to leave the EU, but to have like-minded countries, more like-minded countries possible inside the EU. So now they have only Slovakia, but if Serbia becomes member of the European Union or Georgian Dream's Georgia becomes, so the number of like-minded countries are growing, and the EU will look like more and more the EU that Vladimir Putin likes. So this is why the Hungarians are supporting Georgia. Can you imagine that after these rigged elections, 2 days or 48 hours after these results were published, Viktor Orban came to Tbilisi, congratulated Georgian Dream, and he said, "I'm visiting Tbilisi as the president of the European Union." And this moment, Hungary had the presidency for 6 months of the European Union. And that was, for Georgian Dream, it was extremely important because they were telling to the population, look, European politician, the president of the European Union came and congratulated. So why people who say that we are pro-Russian? This is not true. Viktor Orban is a European politician. And we will, by the way, we suspended relations with the European Union once the European Union is dominated by forces like Viktor Orban. We will renew the relations with the EU and will become member of the EU if we have leaders like Marine Le Pen in France or Geert Wilders in Netherlands or Salvini in Italy, etc. So they really need each other for their internal political propaganda. Now going back to France and President Macron's policies. Yes, I agree that his activation and the strong support now for Ukraine has also internal reasons, but not only, because his shift came somewhere not immediately after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, but a few months later, when he, together with Draghi and a German chancellor visited Ukraine. They came by train, and they visited Kiev and surroundings, Bucha, Hostomel, and all these places. And after that, there was this Bratislava, famous Bratislava speech of Macron, when he the main argument was that Russia is not only Ukraine's enemy and threat to Ukraine, but Russia is the threat for Europe. And it was the first time he said it as openly. I mean, he was the one who at the beginning really tried to accommodate Russia. We remember how he used the term deep state against the French diplomats who were telling him not to engage Vladimir Putin because the others tried before him and they all failed, and there is nothing to obtain from Vladimir Putin. But he believed that all these European and Western leaders always have this illusion at the beginning that they are smarter than the others, and they will outfox Putin, or they will civilize Putin when the others failed. Okay, finally Macron understood, and he made a serious U-turn. And internal situation, of course, is helping him, because now the international engagement of the president is used in internal political debate, saying that he is the only one, and his party are the only one who understand really the international, the security threats to our country. The fact that U.S. changed radically their approach of Ukraine and Europe is another shock. I mean, the first shock was Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and second shock was that the Americans just are changing their policies radically. So under these two shocks, France and Europe have to react now. It's a chance, and if they don't react now, I think it's there's no other hope. So as the Chinese say in this very famous Chinese saying that the crisis is also a possibility, crisis offers opportunities. Yeah, this is the right moment, and it's the moment of truth for France, but not only. France is acting together with the new German chancellor, who seems to be very different from the previous one, and very much conscious of the risk and of the threat for Germany. And there's this good now alignment of planets inside in the European continent between the French, the Germans, and the UK. They are not in the EU, but they are back in the European continent, in European politics, together with Poland, Nordics. There is a group of enough member states of the European Union or NATO on the European continent who are conscious now that now is the moment. And without the victory of Ukraine, or at least not defeat of Ukraine, the future of the European continent is in danger.
Defeat of Russia, you mean?
Defeat of Russia, yeah, that's of course the best scenario, and the victory of Ukraine and defeat of Russia is the same thing. Yeah.
Thank you, Tornike. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank
We
you.
had Tornike Gordadze, and we talked about Georgia, Ukraine, Europe, and Russia.
Slava
Thank you.
Ukraine.
Героям слава. This was a podcast explaining Ukraine by UkraineWorld, an English language media outlet about Ukraine. My name is Volodymyr Yermolenko. I am a Ukrainian philosopher, the chief editor of UkraineWorld, and the president of PEN Ukraine. My guest today was Tornike Gordadze, former Georgian State Minister for Euro-Atlantic integration, who currently teaches at Sciences Po and the Jacques Delors Institute in Paris. Let me remind you that you can support our work on Patreon. Your support is crucial as we rely heavily on crowdfunding. You can also help fund our volunteer trips to frontline areas in Ukraine, where we support both soldiers and civilians. Donations are welcome via PayPal. You will find the links in the description of this episode. Thank you for listening, stay with us, and stand with Ukraine.